So today I want to give my very personal answer to two questions. The first, what is psychoanalysis? And the second, what is best practice of psychoanalysis? I'm going to say IMHO in my humble opinion, because this is going to be simply my opinion about these highly controversial matters. I think it would be hard to find two psychoanalysts who would answer these questions in pretty much the same way. So maybe this video will be in two parts. Part one, what is psychoanalysis? Okay, it's a form of psychotherapy. The word therapy implies something about healing, something about a move towards cure, towards relief of pain, towards removal of symptoms, towards overcoming characterological problems. So I think some psychoanalysts have forgotten that psychoanalysis is a form of psychotherapy. It's as if they think that analysis is almost an end in itself, a good thing in and of itself. They're very suspicious of the idea of cure. They're very suspicious of the idea of progress. Some analysts are more than suspicious. They outright reject these ideas as perversions of what, in their view, psychoanalysis is. My father was a physician. I'm not a physician, but I think I've inherited from him some kind of respect and commitment towards a physicianly attitude. People come because they're in pain. Most come because they're in pain. A few show up out of sheer intellectual interest. At least that's what they pretend has brought them. But even there, usually it turns out that they came because of some kind of pain. And it seems to me that psychotherapy is directed towards moving to relieve pain and to overcome the root causes of pain. So I think of psychoanalysis then as a therapeutic activity. I reject the medical model in most respects. I'm with Thomas Szasz regarding the myth of mental illness. Human beings are mentally ill in the same way as we would speak of an economy as being sick. In other words, this is a metaphor. But I still refer to the people I work with as patients because the term patient shares the common root of pati, which is to suffer. Patients are sufferers. A common root with the word passion, as in Christ's passion on the cross, his suffering on the cross. So I work with patients, I work with sufferers, and I have a physicianly attitude towards the desire to relieve this suffering and to heal its root causes. Okay, so it's a talk, psychotherapy. How then does psychoanalysis differ from other forms of psychotherapy? One might ask, how does it differ from psychoanalytic psychotherapy? This is a distinction between psychoanalysis proper and psychoanalytic psychotherapy that I pretty much reject. psychotherapy performed by a trained psychoanalyst, a therapy directed along psychoanalytic lines, to me counts as psychoanalysis. Every kind of psychotherapy I perform, I consider to be psychoanalysis. This is not to say that there is no difference between the kind of psychoanalysis delivered face-to-face, as distinct from psychoanalysis employing the couch. This is not to suggest that frequency is irrelevant. There's a big difference between once a week, twice a week, 3 times, 4 or 5 times a week treatment. There's a big difference between psychoanalysis delivered by Skype or FaceTime or telephone, as opposed to psychoanalysis delivered with the patient with me in my office. But to me, these are all different modalities of psychoanalysis, and there are important differences. And some people do far better sitting up than lying down. Some people do far better lying down than sitting up. Some people do better at greater frequency. Some people do better at lesser frequency. Some people do quite well on Skype. So these are modalities, but if these different forms of therapy are delivered by a trained psychoanalyst along psychoanalytic lines, then to me they all constitute psychoanalysis. Okay. How does psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic therapy differ from other forms of psychotherapy? Primarily because of its desire to get at what is unconscious. A properly psychoanalytic therapy is not content to work on the conscious or pre-conscious level. We seek to get at the unconscious. We do not want to do simply manifest content therapy. We want to probe beneath the manifest in order to get at what is latent, what is repressed, what is pushed down into the unconscious, which, as Freud has taught us, always returns in disguised forms. The disguised forms, symptoms, slips of the tongue, dreams, fantasies. So we're interested in free association in order to get beneath what is manifest to what is latent, buried, repressed. That's one of the main qualifiers of what counts as psychoanalytic treatment, this interest in getting at the unconscious. And of course, the unconscious manifests itself in transference. And so we're interested in the kinds of transferences that emerge in psychoanalytic therapy. We, to some extent, facilitate the emergence of transference by our relative silence, certainly by the use of the couch. The couch performs many functions. Not staring at each other enables us to implicitly recognize that this is no ordinary conversation. This is not friendship, although it should be friendly. We're after something else. We're looking on at a third thing. Our eyes might be focused not on each other, but with the patient on the couch. He and I might be looking at the same spot on the wall in front of us, with me sitting behind the couch or to the back side of the couch. We may be looking at the same piece of wall or the painting that's hanging there or whatever, but we're looking at a third thing, and we're interested in getting at this third area, which emerges in psychoanalytic therapy It emerges somewhat more easily and more powerfully when the patient's on the couch, I think. But if one is alert to it, it emerges in most truly psychoanalytic modalities of psychotherapy. And we're centrally interested in being open to the emergence of unconscious processes. And we're interested in the resistance to the unconscious becoming conscious. It's been pushed out for good reasons, and there is resistance to its return to consciousness. And we're interested in analyzing the resistance. I mean, early on, Freud found the resistance kind of irrational nuisance to be gotten rid of, but he quickly changed his mind and realized that the resistance, while it is an opposition, it at the same time is an opportunity to analyze the resistance. Are you resisting? How are you resisting? Why are you resisting? What are you resisting? This becomes a focus of the analysis. So the unconscious, transference, resistance. And so what is the goal of psychoanalysis beyond making what is unconscious conscious? What's the point of that? Because that allows the mind to evolve. In my view, psychoanalysis is an evolutionary theory of the mind. Freud's epigenetic theory described 5 stages through which the mind evolves: oral, anal, phallic, oedipal, latency, genital. Erik Erikson added 3 more stages: youth, middle age, and old age. And at the end, Joan and Erik Erikson added a 9th stage, which is the devolution of the mind. Having evolved through 8 stages in old age, it begins to devolve. Okay, this is an epigenetic theory of evolutionary stages. Wilfred Bion essentially agrees with the idea of psychoanalysis as an evolutionary theory. For him, it's the evolution of thought or of thinking from very primitive types of thinking to more advanced, more complex, and more abstract forms of thought. In all of these models, the problem is fixation and regression. Due to problems, trauma, patients often get stuck or fixated in an earlier stage. A part of them moves on, but they leave a part of themselves behind. And having left part of themselves behind, they are hampered in various ways. And they are prone to regression, to falling back in the face of challenges, to an earlier, more infantile way of being. And so psychoanalysis facilitates the regression to some extent in order to make it analyzable. The patient regresses in the analysis to the fixation point, and when this is understood, the patient can be freed up to resume normal development, normal evolution toward more advanced stages. Melanie Klein is another evolutionary theorist. She, of course, was a Freudian, extended Freud's work. She offers us these 2 positions or layers of the mind, the more primitive paranoid schizoid and the more advanced depressive position. And certainly, Kleinians seek to promote the evolution of the person beyond paranoid schizoid functioning to help them advance or evolve towards the more mature functioning of the depressive position. Nowadays, of course, we avoid the splitting of thinking of PS as all bad and D as all good. There is good in PS, passion, intensity, commitment. There is bad in D and excessively dispassionate rationality. But still, overall, mental development means moving beyond the more primitive mechanisms characterizing PS towards the more mature and integrated way of functioning, characteristic of the so-called depressive. I prefer to call it the reparative position, because as I've pointed out elsewhere, we don't get depression in D. Depression belongs in PS, but what we get in D is concern. The capacity for concern for others, PS being entirely all about the self, narcissistic. We want to move beyond the PS narcissistic position towards a capacity for concern for others, characteristic of D, others seen as whole objects, no longer split. The facing of our dependency on others, the moving beyond illusions of omnipotence and self-sufficiency. Anyway, this is also an evolutionary model, as is Freud's and Erikson's. There's a big difference between biological evolution and psychological, and I would add social evolution. The idea of evolutionary theory in the social sciences got a very bad name for many decades because it came to be associated with social Darwinism. But Talcott Parsons in his later years, and my old mentor Eli Sagan, and others, tried to reclaim evolutionary theory minus its ethnocentric biases. And I think we can talk about social evolution as well as psychological evolution. But both, let's call it psychosocial evolution, is a very different matter than biological evolution, in that in biological evolution, the goals are built in. They are not chosen by human beings. The evolutionary process, it doesn't depend on a convention to decide which way should we go from here. This is a deterministic process. Darwinian theory explains the role of mutation and selection, but this is natural selection. It's not selection by human beings. So the goals are built in, and they have to do with survival, not just of individuals, but of species. The goals are given in a real sense, whereas when we turn to psychosocial evolution, the goals are not given or built in, they are chosen. And so here come in the role of values. What kind of person do we want to be? Or what kind of person do we want to help our patients evolve into? Is it entirely a matter of the patient's choice? If I were approached by a Nazi, do I want to work with him to help him evolve into being a better Nazi? No. At a certain point, I would have to tell such a patient that I'm not interested in helping him evolve into a better Nazi or a more talented psychopath. And I'm not interested in helping this suicidal patient evolve to the point where he or she are able to kill themselves. I'm not in the death business. I'm not in the tyranny business. I'm in the life business, not death. I'm in the love business, not hate. I'm in the truth business, not lies. These are my values, and I think they're the values of the vast majority of psychoanalysts. I certainly would never want to encounter an analyst who did not share these values. Mostly psychoanalysts have lied about the fact that their whole enterprise is based on these value choices. We're interested in psychological evolution towards goals that we choose. And not everyone shares our values. Some people choose death over life, hate over love, lies over truth. In my view, these are deeply sick people, and I'm using the word sick metaphorically because I don't believe in mental illness as any kind of literal medical thing. These are people who are bad. They've made bad choices. I'm willing to work with them to help them turn away from evil and death and lies and hate and turn towards love and towards life. In other words, I'm willing to work with them to see if we can effect a conversion. Now, most analysts would find this anathema for an analyst to admit that he's out to convert people. This is a shocking idea to most psychoanalysts. They want to drape themselves in science and medicine, but of course they're lying because psychoanalysis is entirely devoted to effecting a conversion, to turn people away from hate and from death and from lies. We want to help people evolve towards the good. And we all know, most properly functioning psychoanalysts know what the good is, even though mostly they feel compelled to lie about the fact that they're interested in turning people away from the bad towards the good. But that's essentially what this enterprise is all about. Patients have gotten fixated. They've made wrong decisions. Bion says the basic wrong decision they made was to devote themselves to try to get rid of pain and suffering, frustration, to choose not to tolerate it, but to evacuate it. This is very close to Kierkegaard, who says our goal should not be to get rid of anxiety, but learn how to bear it and move ahead despite it. Bion and Kierkegaard are quite in agreement here. So in analysis, the person has an opportunity to go back and revisit that choice and decide differently. Okay, life involves pain and suffering and anxiety, and I'm going to have to learn how to bear this and move ahead without it. Otherwise, I become what Kierkegaard called a withdrawn personality. And if I don't make this proper choice, I'm going to be involved not with K, knowledge, but minus K, not with love, but minus L, etc. So we're trying to get people to revisit these decisions and to convert towards the good. So I'm in the conversion business. Now, of course, psychoanalysts adopt an indirect approach to promoting conversion. We don't sermonize. We don't exhort or demand or reproach. We try not to be super egoish. I've elaborated elsewhere on my distinction between conscience and superego. The analyst tries not to be super egoish, but he certainly carries the conscience in the treatment until the patient is able to pick up and carry the conscience himself or herself. the conscience being the core values that undergird the whole psychoanalytic treatment, the whole enterprise. These are truth values, love values, life values. Okay, I'm saying that psychoanalysis is a form of spirituality. It's a form of devotion to core human values. It's very different from religion, except among those analysts who fall into some kind of orthodoxy and make a religion of what in fact should not be a religion, should be a form of non-religious spirituality. Of course, the same can be said for a great deal of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which also take spirituality, healthy spirituality, and turn it into religion, institutionalize it, professionalize it. Psychoanalysts have done the same thing. They've taken that form of spirituality known as psychoanalysis and turned it into a dogma and created church-like organizations to embody and administer the dogma. Not all psychoanalysts have succumbed to this, and different psychoanalysts succumb to this to varying degrees. It's not a question of whether one is a dogmatist or not. It's more a question of how far has one fallen into dogma and how much has one remained open to the spiritual practice, which is the core of psychoanalysis, as an attempt to help people evolve toward the good. This kind of psychoanalytic practice as spirituality is certainly, well, I was going to say it was no threat to religion, but of course, I mean, religion was always hostile to psychoanalysis, but understood correctly, religion's hostility towards psychoanalysis was the hostility of one religion towards another. It may also have been hostile to a properly spiritual psychoanalysis, because such a properly spiritual psychoanalysis shows up the fallacy of the religion, whether it be the psychoanalytic religion, or the Christian religion, or the Jewish, or the Islamic, whatever. Psychoanalysis is a form of spirituality. I made an earlier video on spirituality in which I expressed a great deal of skepticism. I guess I was a little mocking of the whole of the word and much of what goes on under the aegis of spirituality. One has to distinguish the many different forms of spirituality. I was too sweepingly negative about the concept of spirituality. Obviously, there are bogus, simplistic, ridiculous, infantile forms of spirituality which need to be seen as such. But then there is positive, healthy spirituality, if I can again borrow that word, used, understood metaphorically, healthy spirituality, good spirituality, which is devoted to helping people evolve precisely toward the good. Evolve towards becoming more loving, more truthful, more real, more grateful, less envious, less hostile, less depressed, more joyful, I'm not at all suggesting that psychoanalysis is the only spiritual practice devoted to those ends. A properly spiritual Christianity, as opposed to religion, is devoted to those same goals, same ends. I consider myself a Christian, and far from there being a conflict between my spiritual Christianity and my psychoanalysis, my practice as a psychoanalyst, there's no conflict. They're completely congruent because they're devoted to exactly the same goals. More life, more love, more gratitude, more truth, more realness. So that's what psychoanalysis is, in my view, a form of spiritual practice. We might as well admit it. We have our own unique ways of promoting these spiritual goals. Thanks to Freud, thanks to Melanie Klein, thanks to Donald Winnicott, thanks to the many analysts who have written brilliantly about the psychoanalytic process and psychoanalytic technique. Psychoanalysis is quite a unique form of spirituality with its own methods, its own approaches, but it does share with other proper forms of spirituality, good forms of spirituality, the same goals. Okay.